everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Now today I'm back doing another John Doe case, and this one is called the John Clinton John Doe. So if you want to hear about the details of this case, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. The John Clinton John Doe case is also commonly referred to as the Rock County John Doe case, and in February of 2019, the DNA Doe Project were able to successfully identify the victim. On November the 26th, 1995, a set of skeletal remains were discovered on the edge of Turtle Creek near to a place called Clinton in Rock County, Wisconsin. The area in which the remains were discovered in was part of a private property that was covered in secluded, heavily wooded area, and its owners were avid hunters. This is exactly how the remains were stumbled upon. The remains had belonged to a male estimated as standing between 5'4" and 5'6" tall, and between the ages of 17 and 20 years old. It was a virtually complete set of skeletal remains found lying on its front. The victim had been wearing a t-shirt with the logo of a heavy metal band called Venom on the back, a top that had been specifically sold during the band's 1987 tour. He was also wearing grey camouflage trousers in a size small to medium, a red and green plaid jacket and size 9.5 black Nike Airbound basketball shoes released in 1993, although only one of these shoes was actually found near the remains and it was found lying completely separately. Also on him was a pendant necklace that had apparently been made out of the materials of a dinner fork and moulded into the shape of a goat's head. Around the remains, investigators had also found a butane lighter with a Budweiser logo on it, some Carmex branded lip balm, a black watch from the brand Aquatech, and a number of cigarette butts. He was also believed to have had long shoulder-length brown hair and a beard. An initial examination of the remains determined that the victim had likely died in the late months of 1994, meaning the remains appeared to have been in the location that they were found in for over a year. This was a later revisited fact in a more recent reopening of the investigation, when modern and updated forensic testing methods determined that it was much more likely that the remains were found only 5 months after the individual had died. The cause of death was ultimately listed as undetermined, and I believe it remains so to this day, just simply because there is no way for investigators to be completely sure of anything. However, the location in which the remains were found, as well as the position that they were found in, made it a very likely possibility that the victim had died while unconscious. This could have occurred through a number of different ways, including hypothermia or an overdose of some kind. The skeleton displayed no evidence of fatal trauma, meaning that the possibility of a homicide ruling was initially considered very, very unlikely. Investigators also carried out a number of tests on the victim's hair in order to establish if there was any indication of long-term drug addiction, but found no traces of cocaine or a number of other drugs. However, it has been suggested that this does not necessarily prove that there was not any form of recreational drugs used prior to his death, just that there had not been like a long-term period of drug use. Tests were also conducted on his teeth, which showed that he had, through the majority of his adult life, had access to adequate dental care, as he had a number of fillings and particularly straight teeth. And at this point, it seemed as though the most likely scenario shared by people around at the time was that the individual had been highly intoxicated and gotten lost or disoriented in the woodland area, following which he fell unconscious and suffered hypothermia-induced death beside the creek. Immediately, professionals began to piece together any sketches of the individual, what they believed the victim's face would have potentially looked like, in order to search for the identity. Investigators publicly appealed for anyone who may recognise the person in the sketches or seen anyone in the area in which the remains had been found in the months prior, but since there was a lot of uncertainty regarding the time frame and also how the victim would have found himself in this area at that time, they had just a lot of work ahead of them. A number of individuals had come forward and claimed to have seen a young man in his early 20s, as most of them described, in this particular area on the 9th of October the 16th in 1994. This man in particular had caught their attention simply because he had been running through the creek rather messily, and they became very aware that he was highly intoxicated. He had seemed, however, extremely upset and almost panicked. When he'd spotted these witnesses, he began to scream at them to get away from him, and he began fumbling up the creek towards them. One witness also claimed that he had shouted something about a woman named Mary betraying him and that he was a fugitive, but most of what he was saying was quite hard to make out and he was virtually incoherent. Sometime after these sightings, he was spotted again sat down on the bank of the creek and was described in a much more subdued manner than these initial sightings had portrayed him as being. And this particular man was soon referred to as River Guy, and a composite sketch based on the witnesses' descriptions were pieced together in hopes of someone identifying this man. The fact that he had been in the location where the remains were later found, wearing very similar clothing, and it also being around the same time that John Doe was believed to have died next to the creek, all pointed towards John Doe and the River Guy being the same person. But as I mentioned previously, the possibility of these men being the same person became much more unlikely when later tests of the remains suggested that the victim died much later than initially believed. This means that if the John Clinton John Doe had actually died in the spring of 1995, the sightings of this man in October of 1994 in the area would likely not be related in any way, unless by chance. It wasn't until the year of 2010 that the investigation made a break in the case, when investigators had managed to track down the original artist who had made the distinct and unusual pendant found on the victim. A man from the local area was a particularly talented craftsman and had a keen interest in the metal scene prominent in the area. And according to him, he had made a certain number of these pendants and sold them to a bunch of people who were interested in the same type of music and lifestyle as he was. The general appearance of the John Clinton John Doe had led investigators to believe that he had had an interest in metal music thanks to the clothes and the pendant that he was found wearing, so it's not an unlikely explanation as to how he got this pendant. Details of this case were once again re-examined in 2014 when it was decided that specialists at the Smithsonian Institution would carry out an isotopic analysis of some of the bones found as part of the remains in hopes of discovering some kind of useful information that they could now be able to use due to the advances in the technology available to them. This analysis informed them that the person had either been from the Midwestern area, more specifically the Great Lakes area, or they had spent a great deal of their life living there. This narrowed down their search for an identity to areas such as Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan. This, combined with the location that they were able to trace back the goat pendant to as being created, led the investigators to believe that where the remains were found were likely very close to where the victim had been living at the time. And then in 2018, the DNA Doe Project were requested to get involved in the investigation in hopes of them identifying the remains that had remained unidentified for some years now. Them, working with the NCMEC and a number of other corporations specialising in different fields of research, managed to trace an identity in February of 2019 through the use of a number of methods, including genetic genealogy to trace the individual's biological ancestry. The identity was not released to the public, but rather sent to the local sheriff's department who had originally been working on this John Doe case in order for them to work with the name and confirm its validity. That is the last known update that I could find on this John Clinton John Doe case. The exact cause of death currently remains unknown. However, it does seem like a particularly likely and popular belief that he had passed out on the bank of the creek and died ultimately as a result of hypothermia. So that's everything I'm going to discuss today in the John Clinton John Doe case. Let me know if you guys have managed to stumble across any other updates, whether they've released the identity publicly or anything like that. Feel free to leave it down below, as well as any discussions. I always love to hear them, and also any case requests. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.